Welcome, everyone. My name is Meg Olson, and I am the Grassroots Mobilization Director here at Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice. We are so excited to have you join us for our webinar tonight, Network Demands a Moral Budget, and share our plan to protect Medicaid, housing, and food in the upcoming debt ceiling and budget negotiations. Before we begin, I just have a little Zoom housekeeping. First, we do have closed captioning available tonight. It is auto-generated and imperfect, but if you need it, you can just click closed captioning on the toolbar on your screen. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to type questions about the policies or what you're hearing from our presenters in the Q&A box. This way, if we don't get to your question, we'll be able to address it by emailing you. If you have a tech question, you can put it in the chat, and Eilish, who's running tech tonight, will hopefully be able to help you. All right, so our agenda for tonight. First, we will be grounded in Catholic social justice. Then you'll receive the state of play, what is happening right now with the budget, the debt ceiling, and the peoples and programs that are at risk. Then we'll talk about the need to protect Medicaid, the threats to affordable housing, as well as what is going to be required to protect SNAP and WIC. Then we'll have a pretty extensive call to action with a whole menu of options that you can take to engage in advocacy with us in the next few months. And then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. But again, feel free to put your questions as you're thinking of them in the Q&A box throughout the webinar. And now I would like to introduce our speakers. First, we will have Mary Novak, Network's Executive Director. Then we'll have Laura Peralta Schulte, our Senior Director of Public Policy and Government Relations. Next, we'll have Jarrett K. Smith, our Government Relations Advocate, followed by Joanne Godert, Government Relations Fellow. Then we'll hear from Catherine Gillette, our Senior Grassroots Mobilization Organizer. And now it is my great pleasure to pass it over to Mary Novak, our Executive Director. Thank you so much, Mary.
Thanks, Meg. Friends, welcome to this webinar on demanding a moral budget, what it looks like, and what it means for millions of people across the country. As we examine the questions of what it means to have a moral budget, we call to mind the words of Jesus. You will know them by their fruits. For decades, the network community has been very clear that the federal budget is a moral document. It reflects the choices and the priorities of our country. In the United States, we choose to assist millions of vulnerable people through critical human needs programs such as Medicaid, housing, and nutrition programs. For Catholics, these programs are part of the preferential option for people pushed to the margins and pushed to the margins into poverty. And historically, because of the legacy of slavery still embedded in our laws and society, these programs are necessary for so many hardworking Black and Brown families and communities to flourish. These programs thus answer the gospel call to foster racial and economic justice in our society. In short, the fruits of a moral budget are thriving communities with access to healthcare, housing, and nutrition, These are basic human needs that all people have a right to in accordance with their human dignity. A budget that is moral helps nurture and grow these fruits. The vision of every person created in the image of God is central and animating to all that we do at Network. We do this political ministry because we have a vision, a shared vision of what our country and our communities could actually be. A vision of an inclusive, multiracial democracy where everyone can thrive, everyone is respected, and our politics serve the common good. This vision is to be informed by our faith tradition and the universal values that we all hold. And we want to see that vision become reality. Everything we do day to day to influence Congress, to minimize potential harms and secure wins where we can, is critical. But as you listen to my colleagues explain what's at stake in this year's budget, keep in mind how the moral choices made by elected officials can foster or decimate the abilities of communities to thrive. Truly, you shall know them by their fruits. We urge you to protect critical anti-poverty programs in the upcoming negotiations related to the budget, Medicaid, housing, and nutrition programs that help the most vulnerable to survive. We at Network know that these programs need to be sufficient to meet the needs of the most vulnerable, and they also need to be sustainable into the future. As Congress faces crucial fiscal decisions in the coming months, it is imperative that programs like these that address the most fundamental tools needed to live in dignity and with security are protected and even strengthened. At Network, this is literally foundational for our work. The Catholic sisters who founded Network just over 50 years ago came from communities with an abundance of experience in serving people at the peripheries. These sisters knew as well as anyone the limits of direct material assistance provided by faith-based entities. They also saw with clarity the systemic issues pressing down on circumstances of individuals, families, and communities. They knew the government had not only a role to play, but a moral responsibility. We carry on the work of reminding our leaders of that moral responsibility today. And now for a more detailed look at the budget, I hand this over to my beloved colleague, Laura. Laura, take it away.
Mary, I am so grateful for that, that grounding and why we do what we do. And I am so happy to be here with you all today as we slog through the details of what is in front of us. So let us begin. The last time we gathered as a community, we were anticipating the president's speech in terms of his address to Congress, which happens every year, which he laid out a vision. As a follow-up to that speech, a month ago, he sent up to Congress a budget. And what we want to really do is contrast right now the difference between the budget that the administration is proposing and what we are hearing now from the House of Representatives as they move forward to try to create a budget. Let me just start at the beginning. There is no governmental budget that will be perfect. And even when we were addressing the issues of the Biden budget, we were clear to call out where we think there are shortfalls. One of the examples that we called out very hard was in the immigration space. We understand that militarizing the border is bad for the border communities and creates havoc and pain for those seeking asylum into our country. So we are not going to pretend like that budget was perfect. But, my friends, in terms of our domestic priorities, the Biden budget was really part and parcel of what we've been looking for a long time. Why is that? That budget expanded the social network programs that you're going to hear about today. And not only did they, for example, say that we should end the Medicaid gap writ large, but they also paid for it. And for so long, you have heard us talk about increasing revenue from sources, particularly the wealthy and corporations, so that they are in fact paying their fair share. So when we read how they wanted to treat issues like Medicaid, issues like housing, SNAP, and the rest, we were very, very pleased that not only did they affirm those programs, but as Mary said earlier, they improved them. And they were very clear of the understanding that in this political context, you need pay-fors. And so they went to a mode of paying for it by making people contribute their fair share. We will, my colleagues will talk to you in more specificity in terms of what we are hearing about the House budget. There is a lot of discussion right now, frankly, as to whether there will be an official House budget, because as we've said to you before, there is a fairly big disagreement in the House caucuses between what we are calling House mega Republicans. Those are the same members that, in order for the speaker to get his speakership, had to make concessions to, who very much want to cut the social safety net as a priority. The excuse they're using is to pay down the deficit. But my friends, what we have to be clear about is that this is really not about dealing with the deficit, because at the same time, both the leadership in the House and the Republican leadership in the Senate want to pass and extend the Trump tax cuts, which again is really a key issue as to how we are in the place we are from a budgetary standpoint to begin with. Let's go to the next slide. In terms of the leveraging of the debt ceiling, this is the debt ceiling itself is just the question of how much can the U.S. Borrow, and there is an upper limit to that, to which the U.S. Department has to go to Congress and ask if we bump up to that level, ask to be able to borrow more. Again, this is usually very non-controversial. What happens to our communities across the board if this was not to move forward is just calamity like we have never seen. That is why we have never taken the position of not extending the debt ceiling, because the calamity that it would cause is really harsh for everybody. In terms of, again, what we said earlier is that the House Republicans in particular, now the Senate Republicans have not engaged, which is a healthy sign, but the House Republicans are saying as a means of getting to the issue of extending the debt ceiling, we are going to require cuts to the social safety net. Again, there's no discussion about raising revenue. It's really just a cut strategy. In terms of, we've been in multiple meetings up on the Hill with our Republican colleagues, and there are a lot of people of goodwill who are scared to death about this issue and trying to figure out how to address it. But they know, frankly, that their caucus is really holding firm on this. So we will see what happens. We can only look at history, and if you go to the next slide, that there have been a few times in the late 20th century and in the 2011 debate in particular, where the strategy of saying we're going to hold this bill until we get something actually worked. That's what they did in 2011. the Republicans demanded that as a means of moving forward with allowing our government to pay their bills. Again, those are bills that were taken on during both Democratic and Republican administrations. That we were going to be forced to, and this is what happened, have the Budget Control Act. And it's very important to remember that the severe cuts, we had 10 years of cuts to human needs programs. It devastated those programs in many ways. And really, frankly, the Biden administration over the last couple of years has just been trying to build up the programs that suffered from 10 years of cuts. And here we are again, the question of what's before us. So next slide. Our call, and why we are so happy to be with you tonight, is just to say loud and clear, we want Congress to pass a clean debt ceiling bill. It is usually, again, a matter of course that these things are passed. Congress is what we're going to tell our members is they should not be tying passage of this bill to budget cuts. And frankly, in the conversations we're already engaging in Washington, they will come back to us and say, well, does that mean that we can run at never-ending debts and continue to pass that debt on to our children? We say no. We appreciate that programs have to be sustainable and sufficient. But the question is, who are you taking the pound of flesh from? We believe it is absolutely immoral to balance the budget on the backs of those in poverty. And I just want to really say, because the tax conversation is really just starting in earnest, we know in the House rules, a rule was passed at the same time there was discussions about concerns about deficit, that a tax bill would not need to be paid for and would not be counted against the deficit. So in many ways, we have to say, get real. You can't treat spending programs different than you treat your tax programs. So our revenue, what we are saying is bring down the deficit if you must, but do what you did in the Inflation Reduction Act, where you were for the first time investing serious money into our communities and making sure that corporations pay their fair share. Now, for those of you who are engaged across a set of issues, we definitely believe that there is ample opportunity to cut waste, fraud, and abuse in places like the Pentagon, or again, we spoke about the border as I was starting. I mentioned that, and the Biden budget not being perfect on that. There are a lot better uses than further militarizing the border in terms of a bang for the buck. So we are asking Congress to save programs that impact those who have been made poor by systems and structures. And if they want to get to business, well, look where the money is. All right, next slide. What, as you are going to begin your work in the field, and that I'm just giving you a preview of what we're going to be asking for in April and May. You're going to be confronted with discussions about the deserving poor, or frankly, the undeserving poor. Because the way that particularly the House MAG Republicans are talking about these issues are very reminiscent from the 1990s and the welfare reform debate. There are a lot of false assumptions about people who receive benefits. Those assumptions are based on stereotypes, racial, they are based on gender, they are based on disability, they are based on class. And there is very little, even though politicians will talk about the gig economy, there's very little understanding in reality about what is the gig economy and how does it impact workers. So we know, first and foremost, in terms of the three programs we're going to talk about, we know that most people who can work. We also know that gig workers, low-income workers, often get poverty wages for full-time work, many times having 2 and 3 jobs. We know that there is still a significant amount of discrimination in the labor market. We know that moms, one of the biggest costs if you have young children is childcare. And so making sure that you can pay your sitter and go to work is expensive. Frankly, too many workers don't have sick pay. Too many workers don't qualify for family leave. And frankly, even in discussions about health and disability issues, there's very little understanding of like what happens to a family who is trying to care for somebody who is either disabled or a bedridden. And so really part of the mission is to try to dispel the degradation that is happening in terms of these workers. They are working, they are engaging, and those who are not, there is usually a very good reason for it. And frankly, a call to stiffen up other programs. Next slide. So what's at risk? Again, echoing back to the president's discussion up on Capitol Hill in February, I hope you enjoyed the jousting there, where the president was very clear to say, so you really want to cut Social Security and Medicare? That was effective in a way. And what that did is that took those 2 programs, at least for now, off the chopping board. But what does that mean? It means you go where the money is. So where are they looking to cut? We're talking about Medicaid. We're talking about housing, particularly public housing programs and vouchers. We are really talking about food, and Joanne will talk to you about that. And next slide. In terms of the healthcare portfolio, Medicaid is squarely in their eyes. And we just wanted to give you top line of like, who are we talking about when we're talking about Medicaid? So Medicaid supports people of color and underserved communities. It's disproportionate. We know that there is a systemic racist issue in the delivery of healthcare. 59% of non-elderly folks in those communities on Medicaid. Medicaid supports people in rural communities. Medicaid supports people with mental health conditions and substance abuse disorders. Medicaid supports people with HIV/AIDS, covering 42% of all people who get regular treatment. Slide. Medicaid also supports older adults and people with disabilities. Medicaid supports children. Lo and behold, nearly half of all children, over 41 million kids, are on the Medicaid program, including half of the 14 million children with special needs. And finally, Medicare supports women. So nearly 17 million non-elderly adult women use Medicaid. And in terms of births in this country, it is disproportionately important in terms of financing those births. I'm going to sum it up real quickly and pass it to Jarrett. I just want to give you a headline on what's at risk. And my colleagues are going to talk about things like work requirements. My friends, again, people are working. What is difficult for many people to do is to go through the hurdles, the red tape that the governments oftentimes present for people to get what is their eligible benefit. So they are talking once again, as we fought back in the Trump administration, against structural changes, more red tape to Medicaid. There are also, and these are twins, so to speak, the discussion about per capita caps, block granting. In a nutshell, the idea is to cap the money at the federal level that you're willing to pay for an individual, basically sending that cost to the states to pick up the differential. This will lead to radical cuts in the Medicaid program. And because states, as folks already know, oftentimes don't have the resources to pick up what we believe to be the federal government's responsibility. I've gone a long time, a lot of information. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Jarrett Smith now, who heads up our housing portfolio.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this evening. Last month, we hosted a webinar to preview the 118th Congress. In just a few weeks into the new year, the threats to the gains we all achieved with your advocacy during the 117th Congress are now clear. I would like to spend a few minutes and walk through threats to affordable housing. When reports started surfacing in the press, the direction the House Republican Conference wanted to take with debt ceiling and appropriation negotiations, it became clear housing programs would be targeted. Representative Rosa DeLauro, ranking member of the House Appropriations Committee, sent a letter to the Housing and Urban Development Secretary to find out the impacts of those proposed Republican cuts. And we were blessed to have a comprehensive response from Secretary Budge, who has served in the House of Republicans for many, many years before she became Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. And she served on the Financial Services Committee that has jurisdiction over HUD. Secretary Budge's response considered two scenarios: a reduction to 2022 enacted levels and a 22% reduction to 2023 enacted levels. But before I talk about the impact this will have on two of the largest HUD programs, I want to read directly from Secretary Budge's letter to Representative DeLauro. It says, most HUD programs received modest increases in 2023. Increases in the 2023 enacted budget levels relative to 2022 primarily serve to maintain existing programs, not to permit program expansions. Except for targeted funding increases for homeless assistance and tenant-based housing choice vouchers, almost all of HUD's programs remained at or near level funding with zero or minimal increases. Consequently, any cuts to the 2023 level do not eliminate extra funding added in 2023, but translate to direct cuts to the 2022 baseline. These cuts, in turn, would reduce existing services that families and communities rely on each and every day, including programs housing low-income families. Today's HUD rental housing programs funding levels are necessary to maintain existing rental assistance, to keep currently assisted families in their homes. Under the 22% potential funding cut scenario, it would be impossible, and let me say that again, impossible to stave off mass evictions. Using the two scenarios laid out in the HUD letter, let's look at two of HUD's biggest programs. Housing choice vouchers first. HUD rental assistance serves the most vulnerable low-income families with an average income of only $15,000 per year. And yes, these families have income verification every year. It includes older adults, persons with disabilities, and families with children. The Housing Choice Voucher currently assists approximately 2.3 million families. A 2022 flat cut eliminates funding for 350,000 families. 22% cut to 2023 funding eliminates funding for 640,000 families throughout this country. That's in rural America and urban America. All over this country, we will see families thrown out on the streets. Now let's look at public housing investments. If there's a 22% cut, HUD calculates an expected 78% proration for the operating fund. That's the money used to maintain public housing in your community. At this level, there would be significant impacts to public housing administrator operations, and all would need to drastically cut operations, including regular property maintenance, services to families, and likely staff layoffs to right-size operations to expected revenues. The projected $700 million cut from capital grants would leave no funding to address backlog needs and $2 billion, and that's with a B, in unfunded accrual needs. Unmet capital means the further deterioration of the inventory and contribute to lower occupancy rates, higher costs for utilities, less resilience to climate change, and increased health and safety risks for residents. These draconian cuts will also hit the head count at HUD's headquarters and offices throughout the country. Project-based rental assistance, that's when HUD works with private developers to provide affordable housing within their projects. Those contracts would have to be eliminated, and millions of people would be put out on the street. And finally, the effort to end discrimination in housing practices would be severely hurt by these proposed cuts. These massive cuts to HUD and USDA affordable housing. USDA provides affordable housing services in rural America, will result in an explosion of homelessness and unemployment. Local and state governments do not have the capacity on their balance sheets to support these robust programs. The faith community can't do this on its own. We work as partners with federal agencies to provide healthcare, housing, and food. Finally, the Republican short-sightedness will cost the federal government much more next year because there will be this huge uptick in unemployment, and we will see homelessness all over this country, whether it's in rural America or urban America. Thank you so much for allowing me to talk about threats to affordable housing. I would like to now introduce my colleague, Joanne.
Thanks, Jared, and good evening, everyone. We'll now look at the third of the life-saving federal programs being threatened in the 118th Congress, and that's hunger prevention. The largest of these is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. Now, SNAP is our most essential tool for combating hunger, and it's critical to our struggle in this country to lift people out of poverty. Quickly, what's most important to know: first of all, SNAP supports only those with the greatest need. 92% of its benefits go to households at or below the poverty level, and 86% of them have children, elderly persons, or persons with disabilities living there. Approximately 13% of US residents receive SNAP, and a full quarter of them are children. And all of them are low income. Also, SNAP provides just enough grocery funding in the form of a monthly payment on an electronic card for a bare subsistence diet. Today, the average benefit is just $6.10 per individual per day. Think about that, $6.10. And on March 1st, when special pandemic funding ended, the average SNAP benefit was cut by approximately $90 a month per person, at the same time that food inflation was skyrocketing and continues to increase. As a result, more vulnerable persons, especially Black and Brown individuals and their families, are experiencing increased food insecurity above even pre-pandemic levels. And let's also keep in mind, SNAP has strict eligibility requirements and means testing to ensure that only those with low incomes and negligible assets are eligible, including already strict work requirements, and we'll talk about those in a moment. Next slide. It's also important to point out that SNAP does more than prevent hunger, as if that weren't enough. It's well documented that every dollar in SNAP benefits has created approximately $1.60 to $1.80 in other economic activity. And that's especially crucial in rural economies, which surprisingly have the highest proportions of SNAP participants, and where farmers and food handlers benefit most from the stability that SNAP expenditures ensure for their own finances. But most importantly, SNAP improves the health, the education, the economic self-sufficiency of its recipients. Compared to low-income populations without SNAP, its participants have lower rates of many chronic conditions, including diabetes, obesity, anemia, as well as depression, anxiety, and other psychological distress. Children on SNAP are shown to have lower rates of developmental issues and lower rates of abuse and neglect, resulting in entry into the child welfare system. They have higher educational achievement and regular, particularly preventive health care. So not surprisingly, the research has shown that SNAP participants have fewer hospitalizations, lower healthcare costs, and a reduced need for other public assistance. And yet SNAP has emerged as a prime target for GOP cuts. Next slide, please. But it's not the only hunger prevention program that's under threat. First, we'll talk about WIC. Now, WIC serves approximately 6 million low-income pregnant, postpartum, and nursing individuals, their babies and children, who are identified by health professionals as at nutritional risk. WIC only pays for nutritionally critical foods for its eligible population: milk, infant formula, baby food, whole grain bread, and most recently, fruits and vegetables. Also, local WIC clinics provide nutrition, breastfeeding, and smoking cessation counseling and classes, and referrals for healthcare and social services that connect families to resources they might not otherwise find available or even know exist. WIC is intended to supplement other food assistance like SNAP, and the average benefit is approximately $57 per month per recipient. And every dollar of that is well spent. Next slide. WIC has been much studied and proven to be very effective in getting children off to a healthy start in life, with healthier births, better nutrition resulting in reduced anemia and other vitamin deficiencies, strong early and then lasting connections to preventive health care, and then improved early education outcomes and future educational prospects for children who've been in the program. WIC has a track record of bipartisan support. The Biden budget calls for full funding for 6.5 million participants, and it must not be cut. But we also need to note that there are other federal hunger prevention programs that are at risk this year. And they include school lunch programs, emergency and disaster food assistance, and food for seniors. On the next slide. All of these programs, especially SNAP, are threatened from many directions in the 118th Congress. Most urgently, of course, is the debt ceiling crisis, where they're all at risk. But also for SNAP, there are random individual GOP bills, and coming up later, probably during the summer, the reauthorization of the Farm Bill, where SNAP is at particular risk. All of the programs I mentioned, They're at risk from cuts through spending caps and block grants, as has been discussed already. SNAP has been zeroed in on already with dangerous work requirements, not just in GOP rhetoric, and there's been plenty of that, but now in the so-called America Works Act, a bill that's already been introduced, and it already has more than 20 GOP sponsors. Work requirements are especially dangerous because they have a kind of easy, superficial, but utterly misplaced appeal. Quite simply, talk of work requirements plays to a false and often racist mythology, just as Laura set the stage for in her comments earlier. The very false myth is that SNAP is too easy to access for people who'd be better off working and so generous they don't even need to get a job. We know that the facts are just the opposite. As I mentioned, SNAP has strict and complex work requirements already, such that unemployed, able-bodied adults with children, that's the language that SNAP uses, under age 50, can only get SNAP for 3 months in any given 3-year period while they're unemployed. Given those requirements and SNAP's strict income and asset limits, most SNAP participants, of course, already work, but they work in those low-paying jobs. Now, GOP leadership has yet to tell us what specific cuts and requirements they're going to demand, but the America Works bill that's already introduced gives us more than a glimpse of what to expect. Next slide, please. In that bill, 1 in 4 current SNAP participants, including 4 million children, would lose SNAP. Just a couple of examples who would be cut would include a 62-year-old grandmother who cares for her elementary school-aged grandchildren, ironically, so that their mom can work. Veterans and other persons with disabilities struggling with endless delays, red tape in their disability application, and almost inevitable appeal processes. Seasonal and other gig workers with unstable and temporary employment opportunities. To make matters worse, more requirements will add to SNAP's existing maze of bureaucratic hurdles that many now can't meet. And that will include, as it does now even, people who are actually working but just can't navigate the red tape or provide the reams of documentation to demonstrate their employment. And also importantly, there is no evidence in the research on this subject to date that work requirements do anything to improve stable employment or living wages. Next slide. And if onerous work requirements are put in place for SNAP, and you've seen hints of this in Laura and Jarrett's comments, we will surely be faced with a risk that the work requirements mythology will spread to other life-sustaining programs like Medicaid and housing vouchers. So the bottom line is that more work requirements can only add bureaucratic obstacles with devastating harm to vulnerable individuals, but no real benefits to anyone, along with other brutal cuts to hunger prevention and the other programs that we've talked about today. We really must resist them. And now we'll go back to Meg and start the discussion about how we can go about doing just that.
Great. Oh my gosh, GR, you have provided us with so much detail, devastating detail about what can happen. But we have hope. Catherine is going to come on in a moment and tell us what we can do. But I just want to do a quick recap. So we know we're going to hopefully have a House budget in April. I think we can expect it. And we know that there are concrete plans of cuts to the budget that are connected to the debt ceiling, which must be raised, and as Laura said, is typically non-controversial between June and August. So our goal as advocates, your goal out in the field, is to ensure that Medicaid, housing, and food programs should not be cut or modified with any additional hurdles in any budget deal. We also need to remember, right? We have abundance to balance the budget. Instead of cutting vital human needs programs, Congress must insist that the wealthy pay their fair share of taxes and cut defense or militarization of the border. So keep this all in mind. And now I'm going to pass it off to Catherine, who's going to bring us home with what we can do.
Hi, everyone. I want to start by adding my thanks to my colleagues on Network's government relations team. That was incredibly comprehensive and helpful. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Friends, I think it is very clear that there are some serious threats to the programs that our communities depend on. Medicaid, housing, and food programs like SNAP and WIC are all at risk of having serious funds cut. And with so many folks already struggling, further cuts would be absolutely devastating. The good news is it does not have to be this way. We can protect our nation's social safety net and the programs that help our communities thrive. That said, it is definitely an all hands on deck situation. So tonight, the call to action is join us. Over the next couple of months, Network is going to be leading a campaign designed to raise awareness about the harmful impact of the proposed budget cuts to social programs, build power by strengthening relationships amongst Network's field and introducing Network's mission to new audiences, and generate advocacy in communities just like yours all across the country to put pressure on your members of Congress. Slide. Together, we can ensure that Medicaid, housing, and food programs are not cut or modified with additional hurdles in any budget deal. And I do mean together. We've got some House and Senate targets, and if you live in one of those areas, we're definitely going to be in touch about specific needs. However, action is needed everywhere. I'm going to say that again. Action is needed everywhere. While the push for cuts to social programs is definitely being led by House Republicans, we've heard that plenty of Democrats are wavering, especially those with tough elections coming up in 2024. So whether you live somewhere that's blue, red, or purple, we really do need your help with this campaign. Now, if you felt some urgency when being addressed by my colleagues, it is because our window for action is pretty limited. The next couple of months are going to be absolutely crucial. As far as the timeline goes, we really need your advocacy between now and the end of May. So we've really got like a little more than 2 months to work with. That's it. To make engaging as easy and strategic as possible, we have created a toolkit to guide you in your advocacy. Tomorrow, it is going to be shared with everyone who registered for this webinar, but we wanted to give you a little sneak preview tonight about some of the tactics that we're going to be using. All right, so just to start, it is very important to note that we've created this as kind of a menu of options. We do not expect everyone to do everything listed. It's our hope that you can pick one or more tactic that works well for you and your community. And so the options include lobby visits. These are going to be very, very targeted. Again, we've got that list of specific senators and representatives, and we are going to be in touch with you if you live in one of those places with one of those targets. If you don't hear from us, don't worry about it. We're not going to be doing lobby visits there. Again, very, very targeted. Letters to the editor. LTEs are a great opportunity to both educate your local community about the proposed cuts and advocate to your members of Congress. We would love, love, love for you to write one. And we've got some great talking points documents pulled together to kind of aid you in your advocacy and your writing efforts. Canvassing is another option. You may remember in 2021, we ran our Team Democracy campaign advocating for democracy reforms. Many of you participated, thank you. As part of that campaign, a number of folks engaged in all kinds of creative canvassing efforts, talking to folks in public venues like farmers markets and even the Cleveland Zoo. We would love your help with canvassing again, and we have a really beautiful one-pager to hand out and support you in your canvassing efforts. Site visits are another possibility. Network has a long history of conducting site visits to learn more about the needs of local communities, the creative responses of nonprofits, and how federal policies really do make a difference. And so with this campaign, we are inviting you to help with some of these site visits. We invite you to visit some local service providers, ask a list of simple questions, and then share your learnings with Network, your elected officials, and your local community. Rallies are another possibility. We do encourage you to consider hosting a rally to raise awareness about the proposed cuts and to put pressure on your elected officials. We do encourage you to be creative in your signs and to really draw a direct line between your elected officials and your concerns. For example, Representative Molinaro, please don't cut SNAP, or don't cut Medicaid, or don't cut WIC, or don't cut housing funding. Make that direct connection between the folks who are going to be voting and the consequences and what we're asking for. Vigils are another option. We've got some great resources pulled together if you're interested in hosting a prayer vigil. And then finally, the last item on our menu, somewhat appropriately, is hosting a meal. And so this could take a couple of different formats. The perhaps more simple route is you invite over some family, some friends, some neighbors, some colleagues to share a simple meal and to share a little bit about what's going on using Network's talking points. And then of course, at the end, you'll want to call to action, calling on your friends, your family, your neighbors to contact their members of Congress and to engage in this campaign so that we can put that pressure on folks that is so desperately needed. Or if you're feeling a little more ambitious, you could host a larger potluck style event for your faith community with some education and a call to action at the end. If you do something like this, you could work with other faith communities to make it ecumenical or interfaith. You can invite leaders from local nonprofits to come and share about the needs and the lived realities of your local community. You might ask folks to bring food donations to share, to donate. You could even invite the media or your members of Congress to join you for this event. The possibilities really are endless. Slide. Folks, the situation is a little bit dire, but we are people of hope and people of action. And together, I truly believe that we can put pressure on our members of Congress to prevent the cuts to the social programs that help our communities thrive. I hope that you will join us. We've got a great menu of possibilities and lots of space for creativity and holy imagination. Thank you. And now I think we have a little bit of time for some questions. So let's dive into some questions. Can we bring all of our panelists back for this portion? Good to see you all. I'm glad it wasn't me. All right. So let's see if we have any questions in the chat. All right. Okay, so I see one question from someone who says their senators and representative are very positive in helping keep these programs. How do we still work with them for this goal? Government relations friends, what do you think?
My friends, I think we just have to remember that the threat of defaulting on the debt ceiling is real and catastrophic. And that's why we led with that. There is going to be pressure on even the best member to try to avert an economic catastrophe. So even in those districts that are so good, we want to make sure that we are providing the stories, the data, the activities to bolster them. And frankly, oftentimes, even in delegations where you have a couple of good members, you've got some weak links. So holy gossip, as we have talked about before, is what we're going to ask of them. What can they do to work with folks in their state delegation to get to the right side of the issue? So engage everybody. There is going to be special needs on some members, but no, everybody needs a touch.
Thanks so much, Laura.
If I may, I just add that Laura's exactly right, and it'd be great if these members that are in blue states or safe districts, if they could author a dear colleague letter in their state or in their district to try to make sure that we have members that are firm on the record that say that they're going to make sure that we have a clean debt ceiling and we do not allow the programs that we have fought so hard in the 117th Congress to disappear in any way. Just not even, we don't want it to change just a little bit, because it helps so many people all over this country. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I love the idea of a dear colleague letter. I'm going to add that to the list. That is fantastic. Thank you. All right, I suspect we have time for maybe one more question, and I see a good one from Anthony, so I'm going to go ahead and share that. Anthony asks, I'm wondering about the relationship between food pantries, soup kitchens, food distribution sites, etc., and SNAP. Is it easier for people to suggest cutting SNAP benefits because the feeding/pantry network in the United States is ever expanding? As someone who runs a faith-based pantry, I often wonder if our good work is making it easier for the federal government to shirk its moral responsibility to care for the hungry.
So I can offer some thoughts about that. One thing that has happened, I mentioned on March 1st, the pandemic, extra pandemic funding ended for all states. For some of them, it had actually been earlier, and those cuts were severe. We've heard anecdotally that soup kitchens, pantries are already being overwhelmed. Not even, at the end of a month of those cuts, with more demand than they can meet. And so it's going to be important for those of you who certainly who are responsible for those kinds of desperately needed programs. And also, if you just, anyone who hears about or volunteers at one, to tell those stories and make that known in the wider public, and especially to your legislators. And then also, I'll note that I mentioned that we talked a lot about SNAP and WIC, but there are a number of other programs that get funding through appropriations, like the money that trickles down to pantries and soup kitchens. Either goes through appropriations or will be part of the Farm Bill. And they're all at risk of being cut as well. So right now, we have to look at the appropriations and the debt ceiling processes. By the middle of the summer, the Farm Bill will be on everyone's mind. And that'll be yet another time when we'll need to take action to prevent cuts in the whole array of food assistance in this country.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joanne. And welcome back to Meg. Meg, we only had time for a couple of questions, but we got some good answers in, and I know we will try to follow up with the other questions in the chat that we didn't get to this evening.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for jumping in, Catherine. All right. Well, my friends, we are at time. Thank you so much for joining us, for asking such thoughtful questions. I'm excited for all of you to get this wonderful toolkit in your hands tomorrow, along with the recording and the slides, and to start taking action with us. And if you enjoyed this program tonight and enjoy our policy webinars and our educational resources, I encourage you to become a member of Network. Your membership supports efforts like this and your ability to for us to equip you to be the best advocates you can be. So you can visit us at networklobby.org/gift become a member. And please, if you're on social media, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. And you can always email us at info@networklobby.org. There are real people staffing that email account, and we will get back to you as quickly as we can. So thanks so much. And we look forward to working with you this next, through the end of May, for our actions, because together we will win and we will have a moral budget. So good night.